Hello and welcome to the Melbourne EdTech Summit. My name's Zoe Milne and I'm going to be your MC for this afternoon's stream. I've spent the last decade building tech solutions for the education sector, and I'm currently co-founder of LoopLearn, where we've built automated attendance management solutions to support schools. And I'm a big part of the Melbourne EduGrowth community. The Melbourne EdTech Summit is connecting educators, EdTech entrepreneurs, and industry stakeholders for discussions on the future of education innovation. Each morning, we focus on thought leadership, featuring some of Australia's leading minds at the intersection of education and digital innovation. Each afternoon, we will focus on EdTech entrepreneurship with discussions on the future of Australia's EdTech ecosystem, led by experienced Australian and global EdTech entrepreneurs. The Melbourne EdTech Summit is only possible with the support of EduGrowth's partners, Global Victoria, Practera, and AWS EdStart. Thank you for your partnership and support in this program. As we gather today, physically dispersed and virtually connected, allow me to pause and acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and recognise their continuous and unbroken connection to the land, waters, and culture across the country. Today, I join you from the traditional land of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nations. I extend all our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging in all Australia, including you are joining us today. I add my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present with us today. Let me briefly highlight some of the features of the conference platform. You can see the complete agenda by clicking at the bottom and then selecting any one of the days. You can build your own private schedule by clicking the heart icon at the bottom of each session. Your personal schedule will then be accessible from the heart icon at the top right. Clicking the details on any session allows you to read more about the session and the presenters. This is where you can ask questions or have a chat with fellow delegates. Using the participants icon at the bottom will show you everyone at the summit who you can connect with or even arrange a video meeting or chat. I would now like to introduce you to Samuel Harris, the AWS EdStart program lead at Amazon, and Fiona Litos, the Director of International Education in Global Victoria, to give an official welcome.
Thanks very much, Zoe, and I hope LoopLearn is going well and going strong. Good afternoon. My name is Sam Harris, as mentioned, and I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of AWS and EduGrowth to this fantastic afternoon of entrepreneurship in the Melbourne EdTech Summit. EduGrowth is Australia's EdTech and innovation industry hub with the vision to transform global communities by enabling the growth of Australian EdTech. For me, and I'm sure for everyone on the call, this summit is clearly a very important program, and I'm so excited to be a part of bringing together leaders from Australia's EdTech ecosystem. Personally, I'm really excited to hear about the opportunities Australia has and the Australian EdTech companies have to bring their products internationally, from Sally Ann and Mark later on today. And I think Amazon Web Services would be very excited to play a part in that and support that ambition further. Specifically for myself within Amazon Web Services, we have a program called AWS EdStart, which drives at the ambition to help EdTech companies scale up and scale up faster. So through the program, as members become part of it, we provide technical support, go-to-market, and partnership support out to our broader education ecosystem, as well as access to some AWS promotional credits to drive that next stage of growth without worrying so much about the infrastructure costs in the short term. So please, anyone who's on the line who is an EdTech entrepreneur and is keen to get some support and work more closely with AWS, do apply and check that out. We've worked with many EdTechs in Australia already, and keen to support many more as you guys drive that innovation in technology and in efficacy of education, both in Australia and globally. So we are very aligned with EduGrowth's ecosystem here in Australia, particularly in these dynamic times, strategic partner of EduGrowth, and look forward to working with them and with all of you moving forward. If you do have any questions or requests from me or from Amazon Web Services, please do reach out to me over email, which I think is somewhere on this event page, or on LinkedIn. You should be able to find me. Excited to hear from you and grow the ecosystem together. I'd like to just take a quick second to thank all the fantastic speakers, along with our other partners, Practera and Global Victoria. And without further ado, I would pass it across to Fiona to kickstart this afternoon. So thanks very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Sam and Zoe. Really appreciate it and terrific to be here today. So firstly, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Victoria and Australia, their ongoing connection to this land, and of course we pay our respects to their culture and their elders past, present and future. And we also acknowledge the First Peoples of the lands on which our international guests are joining us from today as well. So on behalf of the Victorian Government, it's my pleasure to say how pleased we are to be a major sponsor of the inaugural Melbourne EdTech Summit delivered by EduGrowth, and of course with fellow sponsors Practira and AWS EdStart. It's really wonderful to see people joining us from all around the world for this very exciting 3-day program, which will of course explore and celebrate EdTech and innovations in education. I don't need to tell you that the COVID-19 pandemic has driven great interest and demand for EdTech and innovative learning models. And of course, the global education market for EdTech is expected to be worth over $342 billion by 2025. So really significant opportunities. As such, this summit provides a valuable opportunity to bring together Australian EdTech leaders and global innovators to discuss a range of important issues facing the sector currently and, of course, into the future, both the challenges and the opportunities. So for those of you who are not familiar with Global Victoria, we're the trade agency of the Victorian Government. Our role is to open the world to Victorian businesses and, of course, to welcome the business world to Victoria. We have a dedicated team of trade professionals in Melbourne and an extensive international network of 23 Victorian Government trade and investment offices located in key international markets, and we're ready to support you and your company and your organisations to open doors to contacts who can expand your horizons and help make your global ambitions a reality. So this afternoon's session kicks off a really exciting summit program on entrepreneurship and EdTech skills. And we're going to be learning about Australia's EdTech capabilities and gain insights from key players in India's burgeoning EdTech sector. So thank you to EduGrowth for delivering this impressive event. Thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you have a fantastic session. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam and Fiona, and I can certainly say from personal experience that it's been fantastic over the last couple of years, with LoopLearn actually being part of the AWS EdStart program and also taking part in some of the initiatives provided by Global Vic. They are both just absolutely fantastic organisations, and I highly recommend all the edutech businesses out there to reach out and get in touch and see how they can support you moving forward. So it's time for our first session today. It is called Australia's EdTech Capability, and the moderator is going to be Mark Lamont. Mark is the chair of EduGrowth, a non-executive director at Education Services Australia and 3P Learning. Mark is also a casual academic at the University of New South Wales and directs a portfolio of niche EdTech companies he has co-founded or invested in. I'll hand over to you, Mark, to run this session.
Thanks very much, Zoe. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning and good evening to those joining us from abroad. I'm pleased to introduce our guest speaker for this afternoon's session, Sally Ann Watts. Sally Ann is the Acting Deputy CEO at Austrade. Hi, Sally Ann.
Hi, Mark.
Sally Ann is responsible for the promotion of Australian trade and investment across Austrade's international network, a global network. And Sally Ann joined Austrade back in 1998 following a career in the private sector. During a time at Austrade, Sally Ann has been posted to many locations throughout the world, including Toronto, Tokyo, Los Angeles, and most recently Jakarta, where she was the General Manager, ASEAN and Pacific. Warmly welcome you, Sally Ann. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mark, for that kind introduction. And I look forward to sharing how Australia is uniquely positioned to impact learners around the world. And good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. I'd like to also extend a very warm welcome to our international guests. I understand we've got quite a few people tuning in from India, so it's lovely to have you join us. Before sharing some facts on what Team Australia is doing in the education tech sector and what we can do together for our communities and our countries, I too would like to pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians, the Aboriginal elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nations, from whose country in the city of Melbourne that I broadcast today. I also acknowledge the land from which each of our speakers and attendees is joining us, land which will have its own stories and enrich us all in its own way. Indeed, it's this very rich past that we pay respect to that helps define our present and points to our future, which is so clearly dependent upon embracing lifelong learning, the very promise of EdTech. So this morning, we heard about the scale of Australia's EdTech ecosystem from EduGrowth's David Linke and Deloitte's Colette Rogers, that it's more than doubled in size since the first census in 2017, and now numbers a healthy 600 businesses. Now that's pretty impressive growth from a very, and it's a very young sector in Australia and globally. And just before the break, we heard how Australia fits into the global EdTech environment. Now these are exciting statistics and outline three important advantages for us at the moment. The first is the power of EdTech as a force for economic and social growth, both in Australia and overseas. Second is the richness of the platforms we own and develop and their comparative advantages as the developers build, manage and enhance learning. And the third thing is the importance of supporting the community of innovative learning companies, of developers and EdTech specialists, like many of you in the audience today, who continue to make a valuable impact. And that's where Austrade comes in as part of the ecosystem, along with EduGrowth, in supporting the EdTech community. And the forthcoming release of the Austrade and EduGrowth Australian EdTech Directory, which I'll talk to you a little bit later. So our purpose at Austrade, and where the Australian Trade and Investment Commission is a bit like Global Victoria, but on the scale of Australia, to connect Australian businesses to the world and the world to Australian business. And our core mission is to help secure Australia's economic prosperity through our work as the Australian government's trade, education and investment promotion agency. And I say education deliberately because education is clearly called out in our mission statement. In fact, at Austrade, we have a very proud history of helping Australian education, businesses and other organisations to pursue their global ambitions. Austrade has the power to open doors, to unlock opportunities and to help Australian businesses go further, faster. And our purpose is two-way. We also seek to attract game-changing investment to Australia, and that includes in EdTech. So our purpose could not be more on point or relevant as we go through what is, I guess many of you have spoken about already, an unprecedented COVID disruption. And together we will get through this challenge. I know many of you, like me in Melbourne and some of our presenters today, are still in lockdown, experiencing the pandemic's hardest edge. And in India too, we understand that there is still huge distress and hardship for the people there. So our hearts and our wishes of staying safe go out to all of you. But through this frightening time that we're all facing, there is a silver lining. COVID has nudged us into a new digital age. It has and continues to make digital transformation a reality. It's no longer a strategy or a plan for 5 years down the road or 15 years down the road. It's actually here and now, and it's dragging many of our traditional businesses and sectors into the 21st century and into the age of the digital world. And this is true in education as well. So education is quite dear to me. My first career was as a teacher, as a secondary school teacher, as very analogue in those days. So I taught English as a second language, and I taught language. I taught Italian, I taught French, and I taught Indonesian. And as Mark mentioned, I was fortunate enough to be based in Indonesia most recently until the end of last year in Jakarta as Austrade's Senior Trade Commissioner and also as the General Manager for ASEAN. And I can tell you that Indonesia and the rest of ASEAN, like India, is transforming, it has digital transformation underway, and it's far faster and more profound than anyone would ever imagine if you didn't live in those countries. And those countries, those markets are ripe for edutech right now. So being able to digitalise education, to deliver knowledge and skills is very dear to me. So I would say that whether you're 22 and just starting out in business, or 62 and maybe in your middle period in business, let's say these days, whether you're a tradesman, whether you're an allied health worker, whether you're a barrister or whether you're a student, whether you live in India or Jakarta or the UAE, China, Israel, or even here in Australia, we're all, I think now, on a lifelong learning journey. And with the advent of the digital age, now is the time for education technology. Now is its period of blooming, I think, blossoming. And that's absolutely the power of EdTech, is to help enable people, it doesn't matter whether it's the education sector or broader, to go to support on a lifelong journey of learning. So let me take a moment to share some statistics on the power of Australian education technology. And just earlier I mentioned that there are 600 EdTech companies in Australia. This slide shows us the breakdown. They're mostly based on the east coast of Australia, in New South Wales, Victoria, and to a lesser extent in Queensland. Obviously, we'd love to see more EdTech companies in the rest of Australia. Maybe there will be when we do the next census. On the right-hand side, you can see the stage of maturity of the EdTech ecosystem. And you can see that about 50% of our companies are in what we might call early stage startup with less than 5 employees. But notwithstanding, almost a third of our companies are now late stage startup, and 15% we'd say are established, plus 6% or so in the ecosystem are consultants. So if we now have a look at what sectors the Australian EdTech businesses are targeting, on the left-hand side, you can see that almost half of our EdTech companies are targeting the K to Year 12, the school sector, followed by almost a quarter targeting the higher education sector, followed by 18% targeting the workforce, and around the same number targeting the vocational education sector, which we think is an important emerging area, with a very small, just 1% focus on early childhood learning. So Australia, on the right-hand side, you can see that the EdTech sector, which is still a very young sector, has a workforce of almost 13,000 now in Australia and is generating $2.2 billion for the nation. So on the third slide, I'd like to show you just a little bit about their export activity, because this is a sector that has a high propensity to export. And I'm pleased to say that all of our established companies in the sector are exporting, and they, on average, say about 37% of their revenue is from export. So still deriving most of their revenue from the domestic market, but a third, roughly, of their revenue from exports. Of our late-stage startups, most of them are also exporting, generating about 13% or so of their revenue from export. So what you can see from these slides is that our EdTech companies, by and large in Australia, are still reliant on the domestic market. There is a healthy market for EdTech, but that they are starting to go overseas because scale is the name of the game. There's one other thing I'd like to point out, which is unique, I think, to the EdTech sector. Most technology sectors in Australia and globally are founded and led by men. And I'm pleased to say that in Australia, in the EdTech sector, we have 25% of businesses are either founded or led by women. Now, we've still got a long way to go. I'd love to see that up at 50% next time we meet, but still, there is an opportunity. I think this sector is much more sympathetic to women, and I'd like to see, women in the audience think about starting a business or actually getting into leadership positions in an EdTech business, because there's already a cohort of women to support you there. So that's a really positive thing. And what all of these businesses have in common is an unwavering focus on creating an engaging learning experience to provide quality learning outcomes. So that brings me to my second point, which is the richness of the platforms we own and their comparative advantage as our developers build, manage and enhance learning here and across the globe. So those platforms are relevant not just in the education sector, but across other sectors. They're not just relevant in Australia, but they're relative globally. And I will add that most platforms need to be mobile enabled to be successful in many of our fast-growing markets to the north and to the west of us, that is in India and Southeast Asia. EdTechs develop platforms and APIs that create learning experience to support the learner, deliver ecosystems that spur curiosity, and personalise, automate and improve course offerings to connect both the what, which is the content, and the who, the how and the why. In fact, as per EduGrowth's motto, EdTechs are all about connecting, collaborating and accelerating. So let me give you a few case studies of companies we know about who are quite inspirational. One, Telehealth, and I think they may be in the audience today. This innovative Australian EdTech company is helping children with neurological conditions and autism across Australia and the globe to become healthier kids. Tele is a great example of a company that started in our world-class university sector and has now been commercialised. A few years back, Tele joined Austrade on a US EdTech trade mission that we hosted in partnership with EduGrowth. Out of that experience, Tele is now well set for its US market expansion. It has distributors in place, consultants who advise them, and a robust export strategy. And we are really excited to see Tele move from its beginnings in university research to an EdTech startup listed on the Australian Stock Exchange and poised to help even more children with autism and neurological disorders in Australia and globally. Another case study you may have heard of recently is a Victorian EdTech company, Keypath Education. It raised $60 million from Advent partners at the end of last year. Keypath Education supplies school management software to handle enrolments, attendance, academic results, cash payments for excursions and canteen orders, and the all-important communication with parents. It has adapted to COVID by changing its staff recruitment processes and induction, which is now entirely online. And like many other technology businesses, it has gained in productivity. It has achieved or seen productivity gains over COVID. And so this has given Keypath the ability to make more hires in its business. So just in the last month, it's actually put on 10 additional staff. Another case that you may have, a company you may have heard of, is this one's in the vet space, is ReadyTech. This education technology ecosystem has been innovating to support the student to apprentice to trainee life cycle right across Australia. ReadyTech is one of the first student management providers in Australia to issue digital credentials that recognise the student's skill achievements. It's perfect for the push to accredit micro-credentials in VET, as it lets providers recognise skills online in a more meaningful way for employers. Now, these are examples of successful, innovative EdTech companies from Australia, which bring me to my final point, which is about the ecosystem. These companies will be listed in the Austrade and EduGrowth Australian EdTech Directory that I mentioned earlier. These companies all deliver exciting and positive outcomes for our all-important learning journeys, and we want to showcase and promote them in the directory and celebrate their achievements. Hopefully, these companies will be augmented by other large education, well-known Australian education companies like Navitas and IDP, and companies like Go1 and Cluey. Go1, despite the pandemic, raised $62 million in a Series B round in May from global venture capitalists and from Microsoft. Cluey is another innovative Australian EdTech tutorial business. They too raised $20 million in the last few months. These are examples of the sorts of businesses that we want to showcase in the EdTech directory, EduGrowth Australian EdTech directory. So to close, as Australians, we are renowned for being early adopters of innovation. We established some of the very first distance education offerings through our schools of the air, which I hope all of you have heard of. At Austrade, we are facilitating export-ready, investment-ready, quality learning outcomes with partners such as EduGrowth, and we want to make a contribution to the $6 million global education sector. As I mentioned earlier, the confluence of education, the coming of the digital age, and Australia being well known for its digital skills, its learning credentials, its education sector, and having a positive economic environment, I think this is the opportunity for new entrepreneurs, for new businesses, whether they be Australian businesses from the Australian community or international businesses wanting to establish in Australia independently or partner with Australian companies. This is your opportunity, and the world is your oyster. So that concludes my comments for today. So thank you very much.
Sally Ann, thank you very much for your inspiring presentation. That was terrific. Thank you. I know everyone would have appreciated it greatly. It struck me your passion for the EdTech industry, the sector, for the huge opportunity and the innovation that comes with it, especially during these challenging times. So, look, your passion is noted and extremely valued, and I know people out there would be thinking, now's my time to go and to do something. And so I guess that brings me to the first question I have for you, is that if I can ask the question on behalf of those out there who are listening, who might be thinking to themselves, what are my next steps? There's an opportunity here. What can I do? How can Austrade help me? What would you share with them?
Thanks very much, Mark. I mentioned earlier that, about the delegations that are going overseas, or information that you can find on the EduGrowth website, the Austrade website, the Global Victoria website. There is a lot of information out there. So that's the first thing I would say. I also want to touch on some of the work we've been doing with EduGrowth, Mark. I mentioned the forthcoming Australian EdTech directory, which we are finalising and launching very soon. And that's something that we were partnering with EduGrowth on, to ensure that this directory is authoritative and is a resource for businesses global and in Australia who may be looking for partners looking for businesses to invest in, or just as a source of who's in the sector and who can I work with.
Okay, and could you tell us a little bit more about the Australian EdTech Directory? I know from David that we'll be hearing from some large venture capital stakeholders and successful investors this afternoon. What more can you tell us about this directory? So
we know when speaking about venture capital and private equity businesses, one of the critical things for technology companies, EdTech technology companies included, is funding to be able to get scale. And so this directory will provide information that will be immediately useful for venture capitalists globally, for private equity firms, for others, corporate venture companies, for example, who want to understand where there might be opportunities to invest in Australian EdTech companies. And we want to facilitate that opportunity and shine a light on the fast-growing businesses in the EdTech sector in Australia, because we want them to grow and to grow fast and to get out onto the global market.
Great. And can you just finally fill us in on where to find the information about the directory and what's required?
So the directory will be digital. It will be on the EduGrowth website and the Austrade website, so watch out for it. Also, a little bit about the eligibility criteria. We will be posting criteria because we do need to make sure that that directory is authoritative. At a high level, any Australian EdTech provider or innovative business in the EdTech ecosystem will be able to apply to be in the directory as long as they can demonstrate a track record of learner impact locally or internationally. But we will post the details on the website so that it's clear for people, and we encourage people to keep an eye out for it.
Great, great. And your data earlier was really interesting about the different sectors. I think I know what you're going to say about this question, but what sectors do you think might have the greatest promise in EdTech across the different areas?
So I think we think there are great opportunities to build on the momentum in the K-12 sector, where we're already doing quite well and quite strong. Right now, higher ed is kind of where the activity is as universities are seeking to bring their programming into online. And we are also sharpening our EdTech approach in the higher ed sector in particular to enable the opportunity for people overseas to study with Australia, in addition to in Australia, which we know is not possible for everyone right now, through our EdTech work. And I'm pleased to announce that Austrade, we're currently developing our own micro-credential in partnership with Open Learning Platform. And this month, we're going to be launching our online agent training credentials pilot. And this course is called International Student Recruitment in the Age of COVID, as you might imagine, and is designed to support agents who are recruiting international students. And it's all about building awareness of the wealth of resources that have been developed by Austrade and its Study Australia partners to support international student recruitment during the COVID-19 recovery. And the idea is to develop resources that will be useful for clients to help build a community of professionals, and as education agents engage with learning experiences, they too will be provided with support, encouraged to exchange ideas and adopt best practice with international student recruitment going forward.
Sally Ann, that's terrific, and I'm sure people watching and listening will be looking up that information and hopefully getting involved and making the best use of Austrade's resource for EdTech here and abroad, in particular in the K-12 opportunity you mentioned. I just want to thank you once again for your presentation. Truly inspiring. The opportunity in these difficult times is quite significant. Just wondering if there's anything else you'd like to add before we close.
We know that the education sector is ripe now for EdTech, not just in Australia but globally. The vet sector is also ramping up, so I don't want to leave them off the list. There's only a small share of the market right now, but we see that as a huge opportunity going forward. And we think the opportunities for EdTech will only explode from here on in. So I guess my final comment to all of our listeners and our audience is now is your time. It's over to you. We at Austrade, at EduGrowth, Global Victoria, Amazon Web Services, we're all here to help you, but we need your clever ideas. And I think together we can make a really positive impact on our own societies, both Australia and internationally, and we can make a big contribution to learning globally. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and I look forward to seeing some of you in the future. Thanks very much, Mark.
Thank you, Sally Ann. It's great. We should do this again sometime. It's an important community, and we have one another to support each other. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark, and a really special thanks to Sally Ann. There were some very inspiring words, and thank you for sharing your insights into the sector. We'll move on to our next session now, which is titled International Investor Lens, and the moderator for that session is going to be David Linke. David leads EduGrowth, Australia's education, technology and innovation industry hub. He has decades of experience leading education technology software and services businesses across the Asia-Pacific region. Over to you, David, to lead this session.
Thanks very much, Zoe. Let me welcome Abhishek Gupta. Abhishek is the managing partner at TVentures, the corporate venture arm of Times Internet, one of India's leading corporations. At TVentures, Abhishek leads significant investment program in EdTech companies. TVentures is focused on uncovering the leading Indian EdTech companies seeking to reimagine learning in a digital world. Abhishek, thank you very much for joining us. Where in the world are you joining us from today?
I'm joining from Delhi, and thanks for having me, David.
Yeah, no, I think we've had you at a couple of our events. I really appreciate that you can dial in for this thing. It's fantastic. I think we've got some. Did you want to open up? Why don't we begin by getting you to just give us a little bit of an introduction to TVentures and the Times Internet business, and then maybe we might talk about the Indian EdTech sector.
Sure. Thank you, David. So I'm part of Times Internet. Times Internet is the digital arm of Times Group of companies, also known as Bennett Coleman and Company Limited. It's a 182-year old company and India's largest media conglomerate. Times Internet, runs all the digital properties, including news, streaming, a tech portal, as well as real estate portal, and a couple of other internet businesses. And TVentures is the investing arm of Times Internet, where I'm responsible for investing in consumer tech thesis primarily, EdTech being one of the largest thesis where we have been investing for the last 6 to 7 years, and invested in companies like Byju's, apart from others like Delivery as well, and a few other EdTech companies that you may have heard of. We have been so far at TVentures invested in over 60 to 70 companies. This is a proprietary capital that we deploy, focused mostly on India and Indian entrepreneurs, and any company that is essentially also going towards figuring out the global market, but primarily India and Indian entrepreneurs are what we fund within Times Internet. I have been running this for the last 9 years. I joined Times Internet 9 years ago to run the accelerator program, which evolved into a full-blown investing thesis that we do right now. I previously ran a cloud technology company and a small education company before I joined Times Internet, which did not do fairly well. So I've dabbled my hands with education since 2010, 2011. And finally found a little bit of success while investing.
Can we just go back to this idea? So 9 years ago, Times Internet decided they're going to build an accelerator. Is that right? Was it just in education, or was it in any of the sort of the business?
Now our accelerator was pretty much very wide. We were investing in B2B companies, B2C companies, and everything. It's only while we started to kind of build it out that we realized sectors in India which needs more effort than other sectors. And that's where, apart from some content companies that we did, because that's our bread and butter, we started to invest more and more in education. 3 to 4, forwarded 3 to 4 years, what we realized was our journey of creating that accelerator was pretty much done, and we transitioned into investing like a seed, Series A, Series B firm, and but investing in EdTech per se still continued that effort. And our latest company is Class Plus, that has recently raised a Series B, which we invested like 1.5 years ago.
Okay, before we jump, because I really am I want to really unpack a little bit about the sort of investments you're doing and why, and you're part of that thesis. But before we do that, it might help us to get a bit of context around the size of the Indian education market, the edtech space that you're working in. And I think you've got some slides that we're going to show now, and I'll leave you to talk about these, and I'll be back in a moment or two, and we can chat about this stuff.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, David. This is the same slide that I shared, I think, 2 to 3 months ago while I was talking about education in India in another summit hosted by you, David. I've just kind of made a few changes on the fast-paced changes that have happened in edtech industry in India, and I'll talk about that as well. And David, remember that we were talking about how I have opened up, my ears and my eyes around what those changes have been. I was not a very firm believer 3 to 4 months ago that things will change for B2B in edtech. I wasn't a firm believer that coding could be something that Indian parents would buy frequently on the internet. But some of these changes in the last 3 to 4 months, and I'm going to talk about it. But just to give the context of education in India in numbers, so that whatever we talk later, you can relate this, is that there are over 260 million students in 1.5 billion plus schools. Most of the schools, in an estimate, would be CBSE. I think 92-93% would be CBSE school, which is Central Board of Secondary Education. Then there are some schools which is ICSE, but there are also state boards. So India is divided into different states, and there will be state boards as well, which run their exams and run their separate curriculum. A smaller percentage of students, primarily in tier 1 cities like Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, Calcutta, etc., also study through Cambridge boards and IB. Higher studies, on the other hand, we have somewhere around 993 universities, 39,000 colleges, with 34 million undergraduate students and 4 million postgraduate students. And you would see that the difference between 260 million plus students that are in the school, so 26 million students passing, and undergraduates only having 34 million overs 2 to 4 year courses is still great. Can we move on to the next slide? Okay, this is an interesting slide. To understand it, these blue boxes are essentially, so this is essentially, an education journey of an Indian user from the age of 3, when he's enrolled in a primary school, up to 21, 30, and how he uses different services to learn. And the blue box there is the offline services pretty much, and the yellow box is essentially offline that has gone online. So it's a combination of an offline and online, right? So as everywhere, a student goes through school, then goes to college, and then goes to a job where he learns online on the job as well. What is unique about India is that apart from school, there are almost 50% of the students who also take private tuitions. And this tuition market is a big market in India, which to an extent has been going online. And Byju's, since you guys must have heard about, Byju's is one of the big online tuition education company. They have focused heavily on it. There are new, Byju's is more of recorded videos and learning while you are looking at those videos when you have a problem understanding. But lately, the online world is also mimicking the offline world, where you go, 1 hour and take a live class from a tutor who teaches you the concept and who clarifies the concept that you may or may not have been taught in school. Another unique thing about India is the test preparation market. So if you have to get into any of the colleges, you have to also go through some kind of entrance examinations. At least most of the technical colleges like engineering and medical have different entrance examinations. Most of the universities and humanity colleges will take you on the basis of what you have done in school. But for certain colleges, there are also some tests that are taken. And I've divided this market into two parts, which is test preparation undergraduate and test preparation postgraduate. Postgraduate is part where people who are in students who are in college actually take tests to get into government jobs. So big difference, and we will, in the course of understanding it more, we'll talk more about it as well. Apart from that, obviously, reskilling and certification sector is pretty big. Students generally start when they are near graduation or during their entire course of being in a job, on the job training, etc. Language learning and casual learning is again smaller, but an industry that has been evolving pretty fast. And a new addition to this is life skill learning, for example, coding, that in the recent past have just accelerated. And if you have been attuned to what is happening in Indian ecosystem, you'll realize that White Hat Junior, which just got acquired for 300 billion by Byju's, was doing somewhere around 100 million annualized revenue run rate, which 4 months ago it was almost at 1 million or 2 million monthly.
The thing, Abhishek, there is that we always hear about these really big numbers in India. So I do like the fact that you've broken down some numbers, right? So we know that there are millions and millions of students, and we know that there are millions of schools. And then we know that there's essentially a really, if the data that I've interpreted is correct, there's a fairly quick drop-off, right? We have big primary school, big high school, and it starts dropping down on undergraduate and postgraduate, and reasonably accessible numbers or understandable numbers for the rest of the world. So I'm really intrigued to get a bit of a little picture in your mind. And you and I have talked about this a lot, but let's do it again for this audience, because not all of those people have been in those conversations. I'm really interested in your view around the B2B market and the B2C market in India. And I know you've just recently said that that's changed.
Yeah. So primarily, if you look at EdTech, you will see, David, that it has been in the last 2 years when it started evolving. It was primarily, so let me just go a little bit behind even 2 years, right? What happened was most of the EdTech companies that I used to find at that point in time used to target schools and universities and would sell them some kind of a tool, whether it's a CRM tool, whether it's a delivery tool, whether it's an education content tool. And there were a couple of companies that, while doing this, but essentially for a lack of either the right user experience or the content, those companies couldn't survive and couldn't, become really large companies, and kind of one had to be delisted as well. What changed in the last couple of years was once, in 2016, if you know the telecom space, Indian data got very, very cheap, dirt cheap, after the launch of Reliance Jio, which opened up an arena for EdTech companies to launch live classes and data-rich content. And that's where Byju's showed that B2C is possible in India, and that you could sell to parents who would want their kids to score better in exams. And that's where the entire journey of understanding that Indian consumers will pay and why would they pay and how they would pay came to Indian entrepreneurs. And that's where I think Unacademy has scaled up, Vedantu has scaled up, GradeUp has scaled up, and Topper has scaled up, right? So these 4 to 5 companies have scaled up rapidly in a way that even the McKinsey report, they put the McKinsey report to shame, which said that, it will be a certain large market here. But what happened post-COVID is that a lot of, initial it was a shock. Everybody thought that schools and colleges will open in a couple of months. Schools were very ill prepared to go and impart education online. But once the realization hit that, it's not going to go away for the next 1 year, slowly B2B companies started to go to big corporates like Microsoft and Google, and also small companies that had the products and say, hey, will you provide me that product to teach my students? And that's where I think a lot of schools and universities have opened up to the idea of education tools, MOOCs, deliveries, and even essentially buying content from private companies to educate their students online. So I think this entire last 3 months I've seen is the acceleration of B2B models. I cannot still name a company that has become big or have raised pretty high, but in the next 6 months or 9 months, you will see that there will be certain education-specific tools that will either get funding or report that their revenues have skyrocketed.
So again, I'm just going to pull something back and then we'll move on. So let's just take the K-12 school market for a moment. I think there's about 1.3 million schools, I think, roughly, as I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. And I think if I'm right, about 1 million of them are government schools, about 300,000 of them are private schools in India, roughly.
Pretty much, and yeah.
I think, anecdotally, those government schools have had reasonably small amount of annual funding per student when compared to, say, an Australian school or a US school or a UK school. And I suspect that that's still the case. Do you think do you think COVID may increase investment from government in the school system or even the university system?
I'm not sure too much about that data, David, when you say that per student spend in India is less. Last I was in a seminar and there was a government officer speaking in that seminar about education. The number that came out was roughly $800 to $900 is spent on education of a student in public and government colleges. In my opinion, that's a high number. US
student per year? Yeah.
Yes. So which is somewhere around, I bet around $850 to $900.
Yeah, now, and there's no doubt that that's definitely true. So I think that I think we're on the same page. We just have slightly different metrics about whether that's a large amount or not. It's neither here nor there. But I guess the question is, do you think governments will spend more money on schools over the next period because of the COVID situation, because they've experienced that they need to improve systems, or do you think that they feel like they've achieved it?
I think they're partnering with technology providers like Google to enable schools to become online. This government, at least what I can tell you from the new education policy, although it did talk about numbers, it did bring some sweeping changes on the way the education can be, gotten online and education can be provided to everyone in the country. My belief is in our Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, feels very, very, and he's now the go-to person for all education policy. My belief is in the next budget, there will be a budget on education policies and education to take online.
Fantastic. Okay. And I want to go back to some big macro themes here. So traditionally, when you look globally, the big markets for investment and edtech were coming out of the Bay Area in the US and also China. And there's no doubt, I haven't picked up the latest data from Holland IQ, but I'm pretty sure that India it's either number 2 or number 3. It's in bounces between there and the Bay Area, well behind China. But so it's essentially, it's an emerging giant on the space. In broad terms, why do you think Indian edtech is having this really big moment in the summit? And it's not just recent, it's the last year or two, if not longer.
Yeah, I mean, see, the way I put it, David, is that there is always a latent need for education companies and better content companies, better delivered in India. I think two things have happened. I'll go back to what I said earlier. There was cheap data that was available. So it was much easier for people to access better content and data-rich content. The second thing that happened was by just proving it, that that latent need can be served if the product and the experience is right. And that enabled a lot of other companies to move in the same direction, use the same strategy to start selling to Indian parents. That latent, and if you need to understand the latent need of education in India, you will have to go and sit with Indian parents to understand that they care about their education, the education of the kids more than anything. In fact, a fairly large percentage of the household budget goes towards the education of the kid. Indian parents are that way. Even probably, I don't remember exactly the numbers, I saw it somewhere, but even probably bigger than entertainment is what, after food, etc., food and travel, bigger than entertainment is what will go into the education. Will save for education for their kids. India is a trust deficit society. If you look at it, when it comes to internet companies, people always trusted Tatas and Reliance. They wanted that trust, which I think was a strategy that Byju's played out fairly well. And once that trust got built in, people were ready to open their wallets and pay for even online content. I think that's primarily what has changed in macro. There was always a latent need. People were ready to pay if you either promised or even made an iota of movement towards that your ward will get better education or will get better numbers in school.
We're about to hear from Phalgun at upGrad in the next hour, I think. And he certainly is taking Indian EdTech offshore. Is the EdTech sector in India predominantly a domestic player, or is it an international player, or both being actively sought right now?
So predominantly, it's Indian market that most of the entrepreneurs are looking for, but entrepreneurs and companies that have scaled, like upGrad and Simply Learn, and even Byju's and but
I just lost you for a second there, Abhishek. I'm not sure if anybody else has. You might just need to repeat that for me, Abhishek. I'm sorry, I missed it, and my control room tells us that we actually lost you for a second there.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, so I was just saying that if you understand the Indian context and Indian investor context, you will realize that most of Indian investors understand the edtech market in India, and they always believe that the Indian market is fairly large for them to build large successful companies. But that said, what I've seen is large companies like upGrad and Simply Learn and White Hat Juniors, and even to an extent Byju's, have started moving into international plays. It's not to say that Indian expansion has stopped, but my belief is there is a fairly large ambition of some of these companies to actually get their product to an international market. And if you actually dial it back and you look at the content that some of these companies have produced, is international quality content. It is also focused. I saw a deck which was focused on IB students and how we can coach IB students. If you actually know the innards working of, for example, Chegg, they have a large teacher base, freelancer base in India. So there's a large, I would say, freelancer and teachers base in India that some of these international companies have been using traditionally for the last 5 to 7 years. It's now that Indian companies have started to tap into that education base, that teacher base, and have started to build products and build content for international audience.
Fantastic! I think that's a really really great point to hear. So what I'd like to do now is just talk a little bit about not specifically around TVentures investment thesis, because I don't need you to explain all of that component. But I'm really interested in your view. You obviously get to see lots of edtech companies. What are the things that differentiate one from another in your mind when you're thinking about investing in them? Maybe it's 3 or 4 things, just a few of them. I'm not necessarily, we don't need every single bullet point, but you're saying, I'm going to give me a bit of an idea of the flavor of the things that you care about.
That's a very good question, David. It's more art than science, frankly speaking. It's all about the understanding of the market. So if you look at the market that I present, the product? Right now, the stage that we invest. So I'll tell you that. When we used to invest pretty heavy in seed, when we used to do 150K to 500K kind of investments, I would focus my energies on the founders and his ability to build large outcomes and successful businesses, right? And again, that's again an art. I would obviously focus on what he's building, but I would give him some rope when it comes to his ability to pivot and his ability to take inputs from the market and then come back to me and say, hey, this isn't working, but I have figured out another thing that might work, right? That was a very open mind investment that I made. But if I'm going in with a $3 to $5 million check and I'm coming in Series B, then I will look at how have you figured out the data? What is your insight that is very different from as a public knowledge? Have you already proved that product market fit? Have you already built a scalable revenue channels? Have you built audience channels with a lower CAC? Have you experimented in that? Do you have some thoughts on experiment? So it's a lot of data.
What sort of seed round checks were you writing? How big were these checks for a seed round when you were doing that sort of stuff, Abhishek?
I still do seed up to 500K. Sometimes it could be $1 million, but it's very rare. I generally want to come in mostly at 200 USD. When I say K, it's USD, up to sweet spot being somewhere around 500K. When I participate in Series A, that's when I am comfortable writing $2.5 to $3, $4, $5 million checks.
Okay. And just going back to that point, just to make sure that I understood what you're saying, even in your seed rounds, you're looking for traction in the market, or are you looking for product proof point, or are you looking for founder understanding? What is the main driver? Sorry, I think I sort of crossed over 2 things there.
Yeah, there's 2 things that I look for primarily, apart from obviously other small things. One is the founder's understanding of the market and unique insights that he has figured out about his market, his product. And second is the product market fit that he has already established with a little bit of traction that he has. But the third most important thing about investing in seed is understanding and keeping an open mind about whether this guy can pivot, if push comes to shove, if this model fails, and his ability to experiment and keep an open mind about learning from the market.
And just another question I just wanted to quickly clarify. Are you seeing female founders in the market in India as well?
Yes, but not a lot. Most of the companies who pitch me, I would say I would come across 10 to 20%, 2 out of 10 female founders as opposed to 8 male founders.
That's about the industry standard around the world, right? I think we're 25% of the edtech sector in Australia is founded by females. So you're saying about 20%. So we've got some work to be done in India, but let's not.
Absolutely.
We can move on to something else. What I'd like to do is, okay, I've got some funding. You've given me some money. I've gone blurry. I don't know what's happened to my camera. There we go. It just stops moving around. I've got some funding. You've given me some money, and now I need to go and grow. What do you think are the things that edtech founders and entrepreneurs need to be thinking on in their first couple of steps to try and get on that growth path from your experience having invested in many, I don't know, I think you said 80 companies so far?
Yeah, I think it's different for B2C, B2B market. I can speak more about B2C market. I would speak less about B2B market. I don't have a lot of experience there, but in B2C market, there's 2 more important things. One is your product engagement matrix or the product market fit is well defined? Who are you really selling to? If you're doing a K-12 market, you are actually selling to the parents while the product is being used by the kid. If you are selling to a higher education segment, you are actually selling straight to a consumer who may or may not have the paying capability. I think in India, there are two important things that you should always test. What is the engagement level that you have with your product, and what's the capability of payment and propensity of payment for that user base? Because pricing becomes a tricky game when you are selling to Indian consumer. As you know, I and you have talked about this multiple times, David. India is divided into multiple segments, multiple class segments. There is a segment of around 40 to 50 million users who can pay as much as anybody in Australia or even in the US, but then it drastically drops down, to a point where users will have a very tough time paying you. So if you're really building a product for upper middle class and the rich in education, your pricing will be very different from if you're building for the bottom of the pyramid. Right? So you have to be very price conscious about understanding your audience and pricing the product in a different way. But also the quality of education or the quality of content will also differ according to your pricing. So you have to take that into account as well.
Okay, so that's a really interesting idea. So one of the things that I personally see here in the Australian market is that early stage companies, edtech companies that get to customers first, whether that's educators, teachers, they bring them on board, they bring them as advisors, do much better. Do you see something similar in India with edtech companies?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, David?
Do you think that it's important for edtech companies in the early stages to have teachers or educators involved in building the product, whether they're advisors or whether they're on staff or whether they're just in some sort of product advisory group?
Absolutely, 100%, David. If you look at the top 3 to 4 companies in India, the educators and the teachers are the founders. Byju's himself was, a teacher. He used to teach, GMAT CAT courses before he thought of launching Byju's as a product. That person is a guy, actually. His name is Byju as well.
Yeah.
If you didn't know that.
Yeah,
Small trivia.
I do know.
And Vedantu founders were teachers before they started this out. Unacademy, one of the founders was actually a teacher who taught in a category in which IS officers are selected. So, even if you see the historical data and even if you see the way the content are, I would say a lot of tech founders come and say, hey, content is commoditized, but understanding your audience and their affinity to that content is a very important game. And, understanding how you educate them with that content is what a teacher knows best. So your product, and the majority part of your product is delivery and content, should be made with teachers being the co-founders or the first few people in the company.
You and I are in a sort of absolute agreement there. The reality is it's very difficult to build a tech platform in the education space without all of the pedagogy, all of the classroom implementation, all the support, all of those structures. It's really an incredibly important component. All right, so we're sort of...
But I would just, sorry to interject, David, I would just add one thing. I don't think that without having a set pedagogy of the platform, it's a free for all pedagogy, and if it's dependent only on the teacher, style delivery, that all scene doesn't work because you are not able to standardize the way that you educate.
Okay. Yeah. There's no doubt that you need to be able to get some efficiencies of scale there to be able to do that at something. All right. So we've talked a little bit about the founding teams and why you're interested in them. We've then talked a little bit about the advice about growing as they are. In there's a little subset in there. I want to talk a little bit about domestic markets versus export market. And in your view, in the Indian context, are you more interested in that traction domestically or internationally, or is it only a domestic play for you?
I would say it's more of a domestic play for me, but I'm not right now close to an international play. But the way I see it, and it's more like personal, like I don't have a thesis for it as a firm. The way I see it, and we talked about again this thing in the last webinar that we were together, David, is that there's a lot of context needed to launch an edtech companies in a particular geography. And if you don't have that context, then you have to build that context or get somebody on board who has that context. It is true with India. It is true with, I'm pretty sure, Australia. It's true with US and Europe. And that's where, sometimes I don't understand that context. And if somebody comes to me, an entrepreneur comes to me and he says, hey, I'm an edtech company, but India is saturated. I'm going to go to Indonesia or Malaysia and launch my product. Unless you have a Malaysian educator or a tech founder, I just don't see how you'll be able to do it. You will waste probably 3 to 4 months of time building that context before you can think about the right product content mix. But if you come with somebody who understands it, been there, done that, or actually understands the insight and the context of the market to kind of taking that bet. But for us, structure-wise, it has to be an Indian company for us to invest in.
Okay. The other question for you is, take Australia, for example. Australia has a sort of parallel market being New Zealand, and obviously there's differences, but there are synergies. The US has Canada a little bit. The UK has the various markets. Is there a sort of parallel market for Indian edtech companies, or are they predominantly just India, or is it Bangladesh, or is it Sri Lanka or Pakistan or somewhere else? Maybe not Pakistan, but you get my point.
Yeah,
maybe not the best place to go as an Indian to Pakistan.
Yeah, Indians don't want to launch in Pakistan, definitely. Even though I'm pretty sure there is a good enough market in Pakistan, but we have had our differences. But yeah, see, David, I think the way, again, you have to see it in terms of context. In Bangladesh and Sri Lanka becomes very, very small, or even Nepal for that matter, or Burma for that matter. And India is so vast, so big that, and it has just started, as you said, it's a developing economy. It's still the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot that needs to be done
100%.
to democratize education to the deep corners of India. I think we've just served a very small percentage of India. My belief is that education, or rather technology, can democratize education, which physical education institutes can because of their usual constraints. My belief is there's a lot of work to be done, and a lot of big businesses to be made just by doing India. There are a few companies that I've seen that have worked in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. But again, as I said, once you become large, you try to expand into these markets and not as the first port of call. But I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs think about Indonesia, Malaysia. Indonesia being a large market, a lot of people think about their product extension and partnering with some content provider or kind of building a team in Indonesia.
In fact, we actually talked about that this morning. Maria Spies from Howell and IQ and I talked about the Indonesian market this morning. And in fact, actually, anecdotally, when I met with some edtech founders in, I think it was Bangalore, actually, this time last year, they actually talked about North Africa as being a market of interest, and there were similarities between those markets for them essentially in emerging economies and essentially emerging education systems. All right. So I think we've got a really good understanding of, the view around the Indians edtech space right now. Let's talk briefly about the COVID situation, what it's done. I know we've touched on it a little bit. We've talked about B2B, B2C, and the change that's making. Let's talk a little bit about that. Let's spend a couple of minutes, and then I want to talk about what the future might look like. And then if we've got time, we'll take a couple of questions from the audience, because I can see questions floating in, but I've been ignoring them. So maybe let's start with talking a little bit about COVID, what the impacts that had.
Yeah. So far, COVID numbers are actually increasing in India. I mean, when it started in March and when the lockdown happened, we thought it was a couple of months, and that's how we made the plan, but it extended to 4 months, 6 months. And now we're thinking that the schools at least won't open till June. There are words that colleges will open probably in December, January, but I'm a skeptic looking at the increasing numbers. I don't think we should put our kids to risk.
When will schools open? Sorry,
can,
Abhishek. When will schools open?
Sorry?
When did you say schools would open?
The schools I don't think will open till June.
June 21.
Colleges on the other, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if you looked at the number lately, we are accelerating still.
So we shouldn't talk too much about this. I'm in Melbourne, so I might cry, actually. People who are in Australia right now understand that Melbourne, we're having a tough time, and we've just coming to terms in the last couple of days with an extended lockdown. So let's not delve too much on it. But going back, so schools, do you think K-12 schools won't open until June 2021? You think colleges plan to open late this year, early next year?
Yeah, so there are talks of colleges, there were talks of colleges opening in September, but I don't think that's going to happen. My bet is that, and it's a strong bet, that the colleges will at least open in June, provided that we reach some kind of a, leveling of COVID cases by December, which is what we are hoping again. But my belief is schools, K-12 schools, they will not open until June. But that said, what COVID has done is essentially two things primarily, right? Apart from obviously, it's a tailwind and a bunch of things that we can talk about in terms of numbers. But there's a huge difference in the behavior of the educational institutes and the behavior of who attend these schools. The adoption rate for online schooling, which was unheard of, at least from the college side, has now skyrocketed. My belief is that some of the adoption and a way of using tools, presentations, online classes will continue. Remember that what we were talking about, absenteeism could be a thing of the past. I mean, if a student wants to attend miss physical school, let's say, schools open up in July 21 and wants to say, hey, I want to do an online class, I think there will be more takers than what they are today. Today, the schools are very strict on that. You have to have a certain percentage. But is that something that will change in the future? I think it will. My belief is more schools will now adopt technologies that helps them to deliver education digitally. And what I've also kind of started to discuss and have thoughts about, and a bunch of these colleges, that hey, is it really important to go and attend Stanford physically? Can I take a less expensive course and attend it from sitting it in Delhi for the 4 years? I mean, I personally, I'm not a big fan of it. I think if you are going to a college, that's a great thing because you learn a lot other than just academic. I think you learn being a better person, and you can learn being a bad person as well, but learn a lot physically with your peers as well, rather than just with teachers and education, right? So I'm a firm believer that students should go to college, but I think that will also see some change for colleges launching digital courses and fully 4-year courses, which they're providing degree for.
Fantastic. So let's spend just a minute talking about it's 5 years' time. We come back, we have this conversation again. What do you think will be the fundamental change for the EdTech market in India?
Cool. Good that you mentioned EdTech market in India, because I was going to say that you'll find more gray hair on me.
You and me both.
Yeah. See, this is what I see. I think that's a very good question. Haven't thought a lot about how 5 years will bring that change. But my belief is that there will be fairly large, at least 10 to 15 or 20 odd EdTech companies in India that will be imparting education online. My belief is, and since India also has far harder to reach places, my belief is there will be a public-private partnership of schools, which will also, one thing that you have to understand, and why I'm saying this, that quality of teachers in India drops after a certain point, right? So I think we have to teach our kids with whatever constraints and the teachers that are available. The only way to do that is using online education and using content that I can beam into places I can't reach. I think that is going to happen. You will see an emergence of an online-offline concept of classes where offline it will only be proctored, but the teacher would actually be online teaching the course on a daily basis. Similarly, I see that for college
or for school.
For schools, sorry, did I say college?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think this will also happen for college, but much lesser than, because it's the need of the hour for a lot of places in India. If public schools really have to do well, they have to adopt this.
Yeah.
They have to get teachers who are teaching at any given of time 4 or 5 or even 10 or 20 schools that are in far-reaching places where I can't procure or hire a good quality teachers, or he isn't ready to come to the villages. I think that's the only way that we can really elevate the quality of education of some of these schools in India.
We're getting very close to the time that we've got allocated, and I just wanted to personally thank you again, Abhishek, for the time that you've given us many times, but including today. I just learned so much from your understanding of the EdTech sector, and there's no doubt that the Indian EdTech sector is certainly of huge interest to all of us. So I really thank you, and it would also be absolutely right and fitting for me to just acknowledge a few people who have helped connect us numerous times, but our first meeting back must be 18 months ago now. I feel I was in Bangalore or Delhi and both. Anyway, it was, I should thank Annie Santana and Gopi Sankar from the Global Victoria office in Bangalore. They're incredible to work with. Michelle Wade in that team as well, who leads that team. And then locally here in Australia, the team at Global Victoria led by James Edwards, who really do connect Victorian EdTech companies to the Indian market. So, Abhishek, on behalf of everyone, I wanted to say thank you so much for giving us your time this afternoon, or this morning. No, it's still afternoon for you, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be in 7 minutes, yeah.
Oh, it's morning. That was right the first time.
Thank you, David. It's always a pleasure to come and speak here. And it's always a pleasure to kind of have dialogue with you and understand various parts of education markets in Australia as well. And thanks everyone for listening so patiently about me rambling off things about Indian market and how it will be more about the future than about the present or the past.
So the one positive of COVID from our perspective is that we've had the pleasure of having you 3 or 4 times over the last year. We would never have been able to get you on a plane that many times, and we wouldn't have been able to get on a plane that many times. So that's the one silver lining of this. So Abhishek, thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you,
David. I'll reiterate David's sentiments around how fabulous it was hearing your insights across the particularly the Indian EdTech sector, but just in general.
And Abhishek, a female EdTech founder, one of Victoria's leading female EdTech founders. See, you should be part of your investment thesis to invest in greatest up and coming Victorian EdTech companies led by interesting female founders.
And I look forward to the day when that isn't an interesting point anymore. Hopefully in 10 years as opposed to 20, that won't be an interesting point having.
Well, that's what you got to run with that torch, Zoe.
Yes, I'll run with it while it still is a torch. Anyway, thank you again, Abhishek and David. We move on to the next session now, and this will be the final one for the day. And it is titled upGrad, Success Through Aligning Today's Education with the Jobs of the Future. And this one will be moderated by Howell Williams. Howell is passionate about transforming students' lives through education. As Chief Development Officer at Keypath Education Australia, she plans, builds and launches online degree programs with university partners. Thanks for being here today, Howell, and I'll hand over you to run this session.
Thank you, Zoe, for the introduction. and all those who were able to hang with us for the last session of the day. It's a privilege to continue the conversations about EdTech entrepreneurship today with our special guest, Phalgun Kompalli of upGrad. So let me do a little introduction of Phalgun, and we can get in some upGrad stats. So after graduating from ITT Delhi in civil engineering, Phalgun worked as a business analyst at Opera Solutions, and there became a principal at Parthenon Group, an education consulting firm, which many of us have worked with over the years, and was there for roughly 3 years. While there, and with some of his colleagues, you founded upGrad in 2015, recognizing that there was potential in the online education space and the lack of a credible, we'll say, and a provider that could give scale in the space. Today, I believe upGrad employs over 1,000 staff with 6 offices and a revenue of 100 million. So we look forward to the discussion. Welcome.
Thanks a lot, Howell. Thanks, and it's a pleasure being here and look at interaction this evening.
Great. Well, maybe we could just run through a high-level overview of some key upGrad stats. For those of us in the online education, tech, and services space, you seem to span quite a few of that value chain proposition. So primarily an online education company, 100% online courses. Are they all fully accredited, Phalgun?
Yeah, so just to give you a sense of what we do here at upGrad, I think our core value proposition and our vision is to help people with lifelong learning. We believe that there was a time we went to college, spent 4 years, 3 years, 2 years on campus, and then started their job and then continued with their job and did not feel any need to study. But I think the world has evolved a lot from that place. And today there is definite requirement for people to continuously learn. And at upGrad, we basically believe in making sure that we're able to offer this lifelong learning opportunity for students starting from when they're 18 years of age to the time they're 50. And in that thought process, we partner with universities to create world-class online programs. These could be certificate programs, diploma programs, master's, bachelor's programs. So we have the full portfolio. And as you mentioned, right, about university partners, we have a portfolio of about 50 programs, and all of them are completely online. We might have a few offline interactions, but that's mostly to break the ice and get the interaction going. But most of the academic delivery happen live. Accreditation, again, there are some programs that need accreditation if you're going into the degree space, but for certificates, most certificate programs do not need accreditation in India, so we offer them separately. Talking of some of our degrees like law or MBA, which in the global university, those and the ones that we want to launch in future, I think those are ones that will be accredited by the local bodies.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about that program evolution then. If you're serving the 18 to 50 plus year old or lifelong learning, I believe maybe not ironically, I guess fittingly, your first program was in entrepreneurship. What kind of verticals and degrees have you expanded to today?
Sure. I think as you started with entrepreneurship, and one of the more obvious choices at that point was also data. Whereas, there are 5 million people employed in the Indian IT space, and a lot of them were seeing their work evolve really fast in projects that the companies were getting. So data was a clear opportunity. We started there and built a leadership position in data in India, where right now we have about 20 programs with 4 or 5 really strong Indian and international partners. As we did that, we also said, look, we will into the data space, but we need to open alternate flanks for organizational growth. So again, 18 months back, 80% of upGrad would have been data in terms of programs, revenue, enrollments, etc. That number right was about 40%. So right now, if you see, we have broadened the portfolio to have a very strong management vertical, a very strong portfolio in technology, a very strong portfolio in law, and we will continue to expand all of these flanks. We think design, banking and finance, etc. So we'll continue to open all of those flanks. Just one other thing to note here is that while data has gone from 80% to 40% as a percentage, in absolute terms, so as I said, in each of these verticals, we will continue to double down, we'll continue to invest and grow. And we will then open alternate flanks to make sure that we have a wide enough portfolio and a deep enough portfolio to facilitate organizational growth and also to facilitate our vision of being a learning provider for learners.
Great. Thanks for the update on the products. And I'm sure we'll get into a little bit of the specifics of what the future, again, might look like. But maybe backing up, can you tell us a bit about how the idea for upGrad came about? And obviously lifelong learning is a value proposition, but what were actually some of the practical steps to make it come into being?
Sure. So I think as you mentioned earlier, I worked at Phalgun for about 3 years. And as part of that, I spent a lot of time working in higher education in emerging markets like India, Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia. But I visited about physically. I went to these colleges to talk to students, to talk to administrators. And one of the things I realized was that higher education is broken globally, not just in India. And any high quality education system is based on 3 pillars. The first is access, the second is affordability, and the third is the quality and the outcomes that you can deliver. And when we thought about this, online was really exciting to solve for all 3 problems. It can provide great access, it can make things affordable, and it can provide great quality. We were really excited when MOOC came into picture in 2011-12, but it was getting clear that, look, even with MOOCs, there is still a lot to be done online learning. And that's where my other co-founder, Mayank, who was also at Phalgun with me, we decided to take the plunge, and we decided it was worth investing our time in building out an online education platform that can provide, as I said, a great learning experience online, not just a content library where you have access to content, but online university in that sense, where you can go, you will have peer teaching assistants, you will get feedback, you mentor, you will be handheld to successful completion, you will get outcomes. So just thinking of building an online university seemed like a worthwhile investment of our time and effort, and that's when we took the plunge and started.
Okay, so the evolution from a platform to partnering with universities. Tell me a little bit more about how that came to be, and I'll tee that up as someone that comes from the OPM space. My next question will be: tell me why you're not an OPM in that space. So, how did university partnerships come to be?
Yeah. So in terms of university partnerships, I think one of the things that was the credential that the learners get from the university is a very important, is of great importance when it comes to signaling value to employers, signaling value to society, signaling value to family, right? So I think we realize the importance that, look, people, even after a great learning, and they deliver on, and we deliver on great learning outcomes, but it is important that they get that credential so that they're able to signal what they have learned and they're able to do that effectively. And that's where we started partnering with multiple universities. It really took off. So, and that's something that we've continued since our inception. And we were very clear that we want to work with high quality universities to enable them to get these online. In terms of the differentiation with an OPM model, I think one of the things that we've been very clear about right from day one is that we want to build a very strong B2C brand, upGrad. We do not want to be in the background. So right from day one, we have invested very heavily in making sure that we build a B2C brand. I think that has paid off in terms of the kind of association that we have with students, where students are glad to learn something else, with the same university, but with another university. They come back after 2 years to do a course. So the common thread and the common credibility then becomes upGrad. And I think that is very important for us when we think of building a long-term sustainable, not only a business, but impactful organization. The second way in which we're different, as I said, is given our investment in being a B2C brand, we do not think of ourselves as a white label solution. We are actively involved in the entire learning design. So for the university, very closely, we bring a lot of industry experts. Just to give you a sense, on most of our programs, upGrad would bring in and own 50% of the IP, because we'll bring in the local industry partners who can deliver the program in terms of case studies to etc., along with other faculty. So I think there are those differences where We want to make sure that we have a consumer-facing brand. We have a strong credibility and a relationship with the learner, and we would want to nurture that relationship with that learner to help them with their life.
Right. So probably an area of that you also provide, is it also facilitation and teaching? Does upGrad invest in that part of the product lifecycle as well? Or do the universities?
So when you say product and teaching, I mean, as I said, let's say we identify program data science, right? And we say that we'll cover these 50 learning objectives as part of that. We will identify which of those learning objectives are best delivered by the university faculty and which of those learning objectives are best delivered by somebody from the industry. Let's take, for example, simple, right? The theoretical constant linear regression is something that a faculty might be great at teaching. But what the faculty might not be great at teaching is how do you do simple linear regression in Python. And for that, you might require a practitioner from the industry who can then come and say, okay, now you heard Professor Ram talk about simple linear regression, when to apply it, how to apply it, what is the theoretical construct. Now I will teach you how to apply that to a data set in Python. So we bring in an industry expert to do that. And so I think that combination becomes really important, where the academic is responsible for the theoretical knowledge and subject matter expertise. And we work with great industry experts to bring in a practitioner's experience, local case studies, and build that hands-on experience.
Yep. And then if we follow that lifelong learning proposition through, does upGrad also invest in helping students connect with jobs or job employer networks?
Of course, and I think that's an important part, where we have a dedicated 40 people career team. As part of the program itself, students get a lot of mentorship, not only academic mentorship, but also career mentorship, in terms of how do you think about what are the roles, your current competencies, what are the competencies you're building in the program, and how can you take that to the next level in terms of what your aspiration is. And then train the learner, as I said, on simple things like how do you make a great CV? How do you update your LinkedIn profile sharp? How do you prepare for an interview? Just making sure that while the academic rigor is covered, we are also holistically rounding the student so that he or she can make the best of the opportunities they get. And then our career team, as I said, a 40 people dedicated team, is going out, working with corporates to make sure that we constantly source these jobs, put them on the platform, a career platform that we have, and students have access to that so they can apply to any relevant jobs. And hopefully the academic rigor and the rounding off process that we through will enable the students for success.
That is a life cycle from start to finish, then to come back again.
It's a lot of work, but I think that's what builds the credibility. And I think whatever we are doing, it comes down to delivering on ROI for the learner. And I think it's an important process to make sure that we deliver on the ROI.
Well, then that leads me to the question about maybe the pricing model and how that's evolved over the time, because I believe it's a subscription model, correct? Which is a little bit different than what we see for other services in the space, although the Udacities of the world or the Coursera's. But you spoke a little bit earlier, and we heard in the previous session that the awareness of online education in India was really built through the MOOCs, and MOOCs equals free, but not necessarily a paid quality online program. So tell me a little bit about how you made that case to the market, to the B2C market, and then maybe also to universities, and how it's evolved over time about, value equaling a certain price tag and in a sensitive market, and what you learned over the years.
I think one of the things, again, we've been very clear of since day one is that we don't want to make it a free or a freemium model. And we don't believe that it is a multiple model, or we don't believe it works, especially in a country like India. It is hard to start off and take that stance because, as you said, it's a price-sensitive market. There are a lot of other free options that this learner can pursue. But I think that is where what we have to do in terms of communicate, first building the value proposition, and then then communicating the value proposition is very important. So going to universities and telling them that, look, this is how we will structure the course. This is not going to be a content. While we have great, how do you make sure we have a very immersive and engaging learning platform? More important than that, how do you make sure students have the required support services? So for example, if I have a question, how does it get resolved? If there is a case that I have to solve and I have submitted whatever on, how do I get customized feedback? And then how do you do that at the scale of 1 million learners? And I think that's the beauty of education, that it might not look sexy on the front end, but I think all the work that happens on the back end is to make sure that each learner gets the kind of feedback, hand-holding, and the support to make sure that they can succeed. So we have put in a lot of that, and it might be a model which is close to scale. Once it starts, it takes off because the word of mouth is so strong, where all of our learners are promoters who go out and refer our programs, who go and say that, look, I've had a great experience doing this program and I've gotten outcomes. So I think that has been helping us drive the growth both from a university standpoint and from a consumer standpoint.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the Baijus of the world, others are the freemium side. Do you feel competition from that space today, or I guess previously in 2015, and then today, in terms of the MOOCs or the other types of competition of the free models that are out there? I believe that was a question for the audience.
Yeah, so in terms, there are free models, as I said, and we do face some competition from them. Baijus is in a completely different space in K-12 and we are in higher ed. But as I said, it is more about psychology and behavior. And what we have seen is that we also have a lot of free content on our platform, right? We call it Upstart, where people can come just to pursue some of the content. But what we have seen is that somebody who wants to do a course for free is very different from somebody who is looking for deep, rigorous education. Somebody who's looking to do things for free is more like a hobbyist who's trying to pursue a hobby in terms of learning digital, learning world history, or understanding the basics of law, etc., and only has a certain level of commitment and interest to bring to the table. But there are people who are looking at a very, very rigorous experience and who have a certain amount of money. More than that, are willing to spend a certain amount of time. Most of our learners spend about 12 hours a week with upGrad. That's a lot of commitment for a working professional, where they're spending almost an hour a day and 2 hours every on both Saturday and Sunday on the weekend. So that kind of commitment that is required to do a deep academic program, I think it's hard to replicate where people move from free to a paid academic. And we've seen that transition being a very, very narrow funnel. While it happens and it is possible, but we have seen that funnel is very narrow in India, and that's why we have taken a conscious call of focusing on building out something where people can right from this academic program, and I'm signing up for this to get solid outcomes.
So what have you learned about the subscription model in terms of the market response to how long they stay on? And how long, obviously the longer the better if we use the word retention, but what keeps them coming back as you all evolve?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we have seen is that even for a 2-year master's program that we run, our completion rates are about 80 to 85%. So if 100 people start a program, then 85 people complete a 2-year master's program. So the dropout in that sense is 15% over 2 years. So I think that's something that we are very seriously on. In terms of what keeps them coming back, as I said, I think the most important thing is you make sure that they have a very rigorous learning experience. And there are 3 or 4 key elements that go into the learning experience. The first is obviously content. How do you working with the faculty to create world-class content and storytelling and explain stuff in a very easy to consume manner. The second is a very interactive learning platform where students can engage with teaching assistants, with faculty, and also there's a lot of elements of gamification built in so that you drive that kind of engagement. That's the second part. But as I said, the most important part is the third part, which is the support services. So we think of support services in 3 different buckets. The first is academic support. When a learner has a query, how does it get resolved? First, peers can respond. Second, teaching assistants can get in. 3, faculty can get in. So various levels of escalation, and how do you structure that to make sure that student queries are resolved from an academic standpoint. The second support services that we provide are non-academic career support services, which is more like a student mentor or a relationship manager you would get in a bank or a telecom company, right? Where the student mentor, obviously, reactively, if you have any question, the student mentor solves for it. But what the student mentor is also doing is proactively, she is looking at all your data and your engagement. So the student mentor knows when you have logged in, how much time you have spent, when have you logged out, are you running behind on your timeline, X, Y, Z. So we collect about 80,000 data points of the learner on the platform in a 24-month program. And based on that, we define various interventions, when to send you an email, when to give you a call, how to motivate you, how do you make sure that we pull you back. So there's a lot that happens there to ensure that the students are continuously motivated. The last part is the career support services, which I already spoke about. So given these three support services and the technology platform and the content is what we refer to as the upGrad learning experience. And that's what helped us really deliver on, one, the engagement and the completion rates that I talked about, but also on the kind of outcomes that students expect.
In terms of real tangible outcomes, demonstratable through jobs, through referrals, and then coming back. Right? So it seems that through this innovation, you might be helping build capacity within Indian universities as well. Can you tell me a little bit about that relationship with your, obviously we work really closely with university partners and OPMs in general. Tell me a little bit about how those relationships have evolved and capacities and what you've learned from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the key things the university partner brings to the table is core academic subject matter expertise, right? IIIT Bangalore, for example, is one of the best technology institutes in India. And we're partnered with them, and right now we have about 20 programs that we offer with them in the areas of tech. Their faculty are world, Professor Dinesh, Professor Raghavan, Professor RC, and they have done a lot of work. They have deep research expertise. And when they talk about a subject, it is very clear that, look, these guys are experts. Their field, that subject matter expertise comes to life, right? So to summarize, if I were to answer your question in one sentence, these are great faculty from universities and we need their subject matter expertise, but they're theater artists. They're used to doing a great job in front of classroom. How do you make them, or how do you take them from being great theater artists to being great movie stars, where we can create an engaging movie that millions of people can watch and get the kind of outcome that, and the expertise that upGrad brings to the table. As I said, in terms of content, in terms of technology platform, in terms of support services, to make sure that we leverage on their skill, we bring this expertise so that these great theater artists can be made great movie stars.
Academic to movie star. It's just a short leap, for sure. Okay, well then we know all about upGrad's general business model, how you have evolved a little bit. Maybe we could pivot close to the previous conversation with Abhishek, the session before us, about the EdTech investment market in India and the higher education market particularly. We're obviously talking in predominantly to an Australian audience, although I think we have folks joining us from around the globe. We know it's a diverse market. India, large and multiple types of institutions, from private to public to state. Can you maybe just give us a highlight from your side along those lines of what are some of the trends, particularly with universities and higher education trends, and then we'll go to the investment side of the house. So teaching and learning, we've heard, engagement. What other trends, on the ground with partners that are you experiencing?
I think one of the biggest trends is that teams understand the importance of online learning. Even the most conservative ones are opening up, and I think COVID has accelerated that. It was going to happen at some point. I think what took 2 years, what might have taken 4 years, has been achieved in 6 months. I think it has had that accelerating effect. And I think the other big macro driver in India is that we are a very large, very diverse country, and the quality of education drops off after a point. Like there are top 50 institutions and there is a cliff. So I think what is very important, while there are a lot of people in tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities in India, the access to high quality education that is limited. but their aspirations are very high. And that's where there is a very strong need for somebody to create the infrastructure to be able to provide them with these high quality options. The other macro trend, again, this plays into what I've just mentioned, about 120 million people in the age group of 18 to 24 in India who are supposed to be going to college. Of those 120 million people, currently only 40 million people are in colleges roughly. The other 80 million don't even enroll in education, right? People also are suffering from really poor learning and career outcomes. There might be 1% of those that get great learning and career outcomes at top institutes, but the other 99%, even 99% of those who are enrolled do not get any outcomes. And the other, let's not even talk about the other 70% that don't enroll. So there is a great need to bridge this gap. And it is impossible to do with physical infrastructure. If you want to build physical infrastructure for this, you will have to invest trillions of dollars over the next 5 years, which is not possible. The only way to be able to provide that kind of access to quality and affordable education is via online. And the government recognizes that. So there have been some major regulatory changes in India in higher education over the last 12 months. The top 100 universities are allowed to offer completely online degrees. They're allowed to do that before this. So we see that there are a lot of regulatory changes as well, which will enable the universities and companies like upGrad to really deliver high quality programs to a much larger audience.
So in terms of the regulatory changes, does that mean more flexibility and autonomy for universities? Or does it even mean that upGrad? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. I think there are two things. I think depending on the ranking of the university, the regulators have classified saying that, look, the top bucket can do 100% online. The middle bucket can do up to 40% online, can do up to 20% online. So I think everywhere there has been acceleration in terms of building capacity and allowing a certain percentage of the course to be done online.
Okay, that's helpful. Well, it sounds that upGrad might be positioned to be its own university if you're doing it so well. And is that something that's on the horizon?
Not really. As I said, I think our core expertise is in building great content, but that doesn't mean we have the subject matter expertise. The subject matter expertise still resides in the university, right? We have great customer acquisition capabilities, especially in markets India and Southeast Asia and a few markets in Europe. We have great capabilities in terms of scaling the learning infrastructure, and that is what we want to go deep into. We recognize that university has certain rigor, the student policies, the degree granting authority, the credibility that's been built over hundreds of years, and all of that is something that we respect, and we want to work in collaboration with the university to a great online learning.
Makes sense. Learning from that. Well, one area that I love about working in the space of the entire student life cycle is identifying all these little bitty parts and pieces of potential investments or technologies that might not be within our wheelhouse at the moment, but there could be other companies or technology or tools that could do it better or even help supplement. So I think our EdTech audience on the line and on our webcast today is thinking about that. How do they fit into, whether it be just on the career side or just the student acquisition side or an assessment technology piece that can maybe not only help with student outcomes, but be introduced to the Indian market. So maybe you could tell us a bit more about the investment side of the house for the EdTech space, and maybe what are some of the highlights from your perspective of the Indian investment market for EdTech today, and then maybe if we could think about a year ahead.
Sure. I think, even before COVID, I don't want to attribute it completely to COVID. I think the EdTech market in India has been very, very strong, and there are a lot of investments that have gone into this space. You mentioned Byju's. I think just this year, Byju's has raised close to $1 billion in terms of funds, right? And there are multiple other people who have raised a lot of capital in the EdTech space. And as I said, there's a lot of interest, and there's a lot of promise And I think the macro thesis is fairly straightforward in a country like why online education is going to take off. And that we have seen a lot of investment going in. We have seen, and this has happened across segments, right? This has happened in K-12, this has happened in higher education, this has happened in transnational education, where companies who are getting student movement across countries have been funded. We have seen it in after-school tutoring. So as I said, and it's mostly been some sectors like K-12 and after-school tutoring have gotten disproportionate funding. But that being said, good companies across the edtech space have received solid interest and good amount of capital investment in the last 12 months. Moving forward in the next 12 months, I only see this accelerating. I see that COVID is an accelerating factor, and what we could achieve in 4 years has been achieved in 6 to 12 months, where a lot of people have started to recognize that, look, oh, actually, yes, this can happen online. Yeah, this can be taught online. Okay, I can have this online. So give options. And given the trends that we are seeing in terms of online user engagement with edtech companies, I think this trend of investment into edtech companies in India is only going to increase over the next 12 months.
Is there a particular, if we're thinking about the post-grad space, or excuse me, just let's the higher education space, ranging from 18 to graduate degrees, is there particular technology needs that you see, obviously that upGrad is not providing, but might be specific, whether it be, like I said, on the training or career side, or a technology on actual learning analytics or outcome side?
I'm just clarify, do you mean technology that we are using to enable learning experience, or a certain set of programs that we are not offering at this point where there's an opportunity?
Sorry, yeah, the technology to enable the learning experience.
Got it. No, I'm sure there is a lot of work that we need to do in terms of pushing the envelope on the learning experience, and there are multiple things that we are also trying to. One of the examples I'll give, we have started a project 6 months back on the discussion forum, right? Where people post questions on the discussion forum, peers respond, teaching assistants respond, and we want to make it very, but we also want it to be fast so the learner does not have to wait for too long. One of the projects that we have picked up is, let's say we're launching a data science program for the 25th time, right? The questions across cohorts do not change. 80% of them are the same. The question today, it is very, very likely that that question was asked some time back, and we already have an answer for that in our database. How do you use NLP to make sure that those answers get auto-populated immediately the question arises, right? That's a capability that we are building in-house to ensure that that delivery happens faster. Same with correction of case studies. The case study submissions that students do are evaluated by teachers, and obviously it's a manual exercise.
Yeah.
We are constantly sure that if a teaching assistant today takes 15 minutes to grade an assignment, how can we make it 10 minutes by using technology? How can we make it 5 minutes 20 months later? So I think just compressing that, there's a lot of technology that we need to figure out to make sure that we're able to deliver the kind of this kind of operations and learning infrastructure at scale.
Hey, Phalgun and Howell. I'm just going to jump in and ask a few questions that are coming in from the audience as well. Just take the opportunity. It's been fantastic so far hearing, about your passion and focus on student success, and really how you've managed to harness that to help scale upGrad. So it'll be good to, and I know that our audience is very interested on learning more and asking some targeted questions as well. So one of the first ones that we've had come in is, how do early stage edtech companies connect with university partners, and what are the first steps to a partnership in your experience?
I think one of the first things that we have seen is important is to have a very clear value proposition. That this is what we're good at, this is what we need from the university, and this is what you should expect in terms of outcome from this program. And I think we have been very clear from day one that, look, upGrad is going to be an asynchronous model by some live delivery. This is how we're going to build the learning experience and engage students. This is the outcomes we're going to deliver on. And from a university standpoint, we want to partner with you for two things. One, we need faculty time to design, develop, and deliver the program. And we will deliver ROI per faculty hour. So let's say we will deliver on $15,000 per faculty hour you invest, so that you have a meaningful financial return from this. So I think having that value proposition for the university very clear, I think has for us. The second thing that has helped us is given our background and our experience in education, my founder, as I said earlier, my co-founder, Mayank, is also from Phalgun and work in hardship. I think just the credibility and the network that we had from that also helped us initially to crack open a few deals. But the last and the most important point, I think as word of mouth matters the most for customers, for universities, for everybody else. So once we got the first university partner and we did a great job, it opened up so many doors, because it's such as everybody knows some vice chancellor meets another vice chancellor at a conference, at a meeting, and they ask, oh, how is your thing with upGrad? And just the kind of feedback that they receive is very, very important. So making sure that the one or two relationships you start with, you really and make sure they're really happy, I think a long way in terms of helping you scale up really fast.
Yeah, the customer is always right mentality, and delivering great customer service goes a long way. Yeah. So this is an interesting one that comes in. It's around the universities stereotypically, which might be a geographic point of view or analysis, but this person saying that universities are stereotypically slow in terms of making changes to innovation and structural changes within their organisations. And the question is upGrad pushing them to drive innovation and to actually drive change?
Of course, it's, and this was true 5 years back. This is true today. This will be true 10 years from now. Universities will be slow, will be conservative, but there will be universities and enough faculty administrators who will be open to change and will be willing to experiment. And for us, it is a treadmill process. Like, we don't expect it to end anytime soon. We are on a treadmill and we are happy running on it for a while now. Just to make sure that we change and we constantly faculty give them data to make sure that they understand why we're doing something, our point of view. And then, as I said, it's a constant process of pushing them to innovate.
Yeah. So again, very customer focused, isn't it? It's all about constantly engaging and providing that support, not just to the students, but to the staff and administrators as well.
Yeah. And just I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
There's a lot of data that we have online when we're running programs online. I think we need to leverage that to drive and influence decision making. So just for example, if I go and tell the faculty, you have not done the concept well, can we redo this, right? He might ask me to say, like, you don't know what you're talking about. I've been teaching this for 30 years. You're wrong, right? That is one conversation. While on the other hand, what I can do in an online classroom is student feedback, which is very easy to collect online, right? But I can actually also give the professor data on, okay, while watching your lecture, 80% of the people actually rewinded the video and went back to minute 2 to watch it again, right? And I've done that multiple times. And it's a clear indication that, look, they were not following what you taught from minute 2 to minute 8 in that video. And based on that, when we had asked assessments, 60% of them got it wrong, as compared to on average 10% of them get it wrong. So clearly, whatever we have taught in that 2 to 8 minutes has not worked. Now, when you have this productive conversation which is data packed, faculty knows that, look, okay, there is sense to what these guys are saying. They're not just giving me a subjective opinion, but they're just giving me a very objective, data-driven point of view, and I have to respect that. So I think there are a lot of ways in which you can engage with faculty and to push for innovation and change.
Yeah, definitely. And if you can, I guess, remove any of the resistance or hurdles that people might feel if they're not so technologically enabled, or they're not so focused on that side of things, then it can really help drive them forward. And it sounds like that's exactly what you've done. We are a few minutes past 5, so I think it's time that we'll need to wrap up. But a huge thanks to Howell for running this this session, and obviously to Phalgun as well for giving you time this afternoon to go into upGrad in a bit more detail and share your experiences.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Howell, for the session. And it was great being here and interacting with all of you, and look forward to seeing you also.
The same. We look forward to hearing about upGrad for the next 5 years. What's going to happen? Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, thanks, Phalgun. So really that was a perfect session to wrap up what's been a great first day of the EdTech Summit. On behalf of EduGrowth and our summit partners, I would like to thank all of the speakers and moderators for lending their time and their expertise this afternoon. If you missed any of this morning's sessions, or if you want to go back and rewatch any of these sessions in this afternoon's stream, they will be provided via the website and notifications via social media when they're published at the end of the conference. So in a few days' time or next week, keep an eye out for that. This is only the first day of the summit, so please do join us again at 9 AM tomorrow when we will kick off day 2. And that is all. Thank you and goodbye.